From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
Now, if we were to rewind back to before March 2019, there is no way you'd catch me out and about photographing landscapes, woodland and seascapes. I was, and I am, a portrait photographer, but before the pandemic, if I didn't have a portrait to take, be it a paid gig or something I was working on of my own, then my camera stayed in my camera bag and didn't see the light of day. I had no interest in photographing other stuff. I just loved taking portraits. But when you're basically told that you can't do that anymore, what the hell do you do? Restrictions did allow me as a working photographer to carry on working because not everything I do can be done at home. I have to be out and about to take portraits, but when you can't have contact with people because it's not safe, well, what? Now, I'm the kind of person that has to keep doing stuff. If I don't produce something new on a very regular basis, I get uneasy, I get frustrated. It doesn't have to be something good, I just have to be doing something. I have to keep the tools in my hands. Photography, in fact just being creative, isn't something I feel that you can pick up as and when you feel like it. I said in a video on my YouTube channel that creativity is like a muscle and we need to keep exercising it, because if we don't, then like our muscles, it gets weaker. We can build it up again, but it's way easier to maintain it at the very least. So at times like this, what do you do? Adapt. In lockdown 1, I did something I never did as a child: build airfix models. I purchased a load of World War II aircraft models, glued them really badly and painted them just awful, but then photographed them on the desk in my office and created my own versions of wartime paintings. No bullets, no flames or any of that kind of stuff. Just pictures of aircraft gracefully flying through the air. And you know what? I loved it. I never would have done it without the lockdown kicking in, but I genuinely loved doing it. It was such great escapism. It was great too because it kept me doing photography techniques I use when ordinarily taking close-up portraits, using an 85mm lens and then focus peaking to make sure that the eyes are pin sharp when using a wide open aperture. It also forced me to come up with new techniques for making propellers and shadows and colouring. And yes, between you and me, I did make aircraft noises when I was doing it. Anyway, I did quite a few of these, but in all honesty, it got a little bit samey. So I needed something else to keep me in that creative zone. I decided now was the right time to restart my landscape photography project. A project I'd tried a couple of years ago, and that's all it was, a try, because I only ever did one picture. But to be fair, other things, namely my 39 to 45 portraits project, did take off, and that swallowed up a lot of my time.
Their portraits have now been taken by Lichfield-born photographer Glyn Dewis as part of his 3945 project to try and photograph all surviving World War II veterans.
As far as I saw it, whenever they did have pictures, it was always pictures that were taken when they were at events. So I wanted them to have a portrait that was something that looked timeless and that, you know, could be passed on to them, could be passed on to their families for generations to come.
My goal with the landscape photography wasn't and isn't to change what I do, not at all. It is, however, to keep me being creative, so that I can get better and better at landscape photography, seascapes, woodlands and all that kind of stuff. I started going out locally, and I've explained this in other videos on my YouTube channel that I failed big time. But after a while I knew why this was. I was looking too hard. I was hunting for a photograph. When I did that, it never happened. However, when I slowed down and took the time to enjoy where I was, and let's face it, just being out in the fresh air whilst all this horrible situation plays on around us feels great, I did and do have successes. Taking the time to just stop, grab a coffee from my flask and breathe it all in. Damn, it feels good. Total escapism. Oh, and there's this thing that is so new to me. If I don't get a picture, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that I'm keeping the tools in my hands and I'm keeping this in a creative space. Also, thinking about it, I'm learning more about my camera. I'm using settings that I wouldn't use when taking portraits. I'm using lenses that I have, but were just gathering dust. I'm keeping everything to a minimum so as not to confuse myself or give me too many options. I'm using a 70 to 200mm lens, an f4, which is pin sharp but also light and portable, so it doesn't weigh my camera bag down. This is great for isolating areas that I see which before I was finding overwhelming and just too much to choose from. I kept trying to include the whole scene. I'm also using a 16 to 35mm lens, an f4. Again, light and sharp, but also perfect for creating drama, especially with slower shutter speeds. I'm also taking out a macro lens, a 90mm f2.8, because this guarantees I get to photograph something, even if the intended shot doesn't come off. There's a whole world at your feet, and I realise now how much I've been missing out on. So much fun. When I first tried my landscape project, I tried using filters, but found them bulky and cumbersome to attach. I'm now using magnetic ones that make life so much easier, and so are always in my bag and no longer left behind. I'm loving that there is so much to learn. Checking weather forecasts, tide times, how much cloud is expected, and if the weather forecasters get it wrong as they so often do, who cares? I'm out with the camera. And this is so important to me. It's keeping me familiar with the kit because, as the saying goes, if you don't use it, you lose it. Not completely, of course, but you can get rusty. Doing something, even if it's not your usual, is exercising your creativity so you can hit the ground running when we're able. Adapting for me has also meant creating more time lapses. Not just clouds racing by, but time lapses created over longer periods, such as the tide coming in or a plant opening in the sunlight. I never would have done any of this without adapting to restrictions. Just a couple of days ago before recording this video, I headed back to the very first location that I attempted to photograph when starting out on this journey. I wanted to see how I would tackle it after a few months of successes and failures. I loved every minute of it, and yes, I'm quite happy with what I got. The past period of time in our life since the pandemic struck has certainly been challenging, but if I'm honest, by adapting and making sure I keep in the creative zone, I think it's improved me as a photographer. It's opened my eyes to other genres of photography, not to do instead, but to do in addition. There will always now be something to photograph. If I can't do a portrait, then maybe a landscape. If that's a no-go, then maybe a macro, or maybe even a time-lapse. We're so lucky to have this creative outlet where we can do what we like, do what makes us happy, keeps us learning, is sociable, and also offers escapism as and when we need it, so long as we remain adaptable. Thank you to Wex and Sony, in particular Mark Baber, for sponsoring this video.